They told you it was just a meme, a harmless internet mystery, an accidental coincidence. But a weapons program isn't accidental. And behind closed doors in Geneva, the architects of this operation have whispered the same thing for years. Humanity has been staring at the exhaust and completely ignoring the engine. You know the story of the Mandela Effect, but no one ever talks about what happens when the calibration is over and the real machine turns on. Before we move forward, the objective is simple. Thinkavarium breaks apart the government's sleight of hand and cuts through the engineered noise designed to keep you compliant. We give you the raw intelligence to see the chessboard as it actually lies. And now that I've come in from the cold, I no longer have a state-sponsored slush fund. This operation is entirely independent and viewer-supported, which means we answer to you. If you want to help keep this signal active, the research uncompromised, check the support link in the briefing below. Every layer has a backstory. Here's what Ian Fleming never put on the page, and what Albert R. Broccoli never put in his films. This is the years that the villains spent building the base before MI6 ever caught the set. You never see the permit applications. You never see the concrete trucks queuing at 2 AM, the calibration logs, the years of quiet, patient negotiation with the local power authority to make sure that it flies underneath the radar. The audience only ever gets the final countdown, the reveal, the moment that Bond already let himself in through a ventilation shaft he shouldn't have known about. Nobody in the audience ever asks who poured the foundation, and that is the whole trick. You never throw a system this size to full power on day one. You treat it like cooking a crayfish alive. Drop it into cool water and slowly bring up the heat. The creature doesn't notice a thing until it's too late. Humans are no different. CERN's soft start is what the rest of us call the Mandela Effect. The timeline glitches, the shared false memories, the internet's decade-long argument about a logo. None of that was ever the objective, though. That was electrical bleed-off, a byproduct. Not a failure, a warning shot fired quietly into the casualty itself. Nobody flinched, and that's the part you should worry about. Every meme, every forum thread dissecting a childhood movie frame by frame. They weren't measuring belief. They were measuring tolerance, the way a case officer watches a target's routine before they make contact. How much reality could bend in public before the public organized against it. The public did exactly what the crayfish did. It absorbed the anomaly. It absorbed it in ways that CERN could only wish for, as a fun internet mystery, something to argue about over coffee, something that content creators could package and monetize into 1,000 thumbnails, with a little red arrow and a shocked face. No congressional hearings, no demands to shut the facility down, no pitchforks outside the gate in Geneva. We felt the ground move under us and we just kept walking to work. When resistance to a soft start comes back this low, there's only one move left for the people running the operation. You don't run a second test. You shut down the prototype, clear the floor, and start building the real thing. The long shutdown was never supposed to be a maintenance cycle. It's supposed to be an escalation, dressed in a hard hat. It's Saturday, June 27th, 2026, 6 o'clock in the morning, Geneva time. The Large Hadron Collider's own operation dashboard, the one the control room watches every second of every run, the one that tracked collisions for 18 straight years, logged its final event, and then, on its own screen, displayed a single word: goodbye. 2 days later, on Monday, June 29th, the tunnel's electrical circuits were locked out. Construction crews walked in the same doors physicists had used for the last 2 decades. The official story is routine maintenance, a consolidation period, some quiet housekeeping before the sequel gets a release date. They did not power down the most powerful machine on Earth to tighten a few bolts. They shut it down because Phase 1 of the operation was complete. and the prototype had finished its job. Every operation gets a changeover at the top, right before the real work begins. Somebody new signs the assets. CERN's changeover happened on January 1st, 2026, when Mark Thompson took over as Director General. This was just in time to be the man standing on the podium the day the machine went dark. Thompson told the press, "This is a real opportunity to explore the universe in a way we've never done before." Oliver Bruning, CERN's Director for Accelerators and Technology, put it a little differently. He said the old machine had exceeded every expectation. 2 men, 2 lines, both technically true. One is a eulogy, the other is a mission briefing for whoever's listening close enough to hear the difference. Here is the actual engineering reality under the French-Swiss border right now. Jean-Philippe Toc, who is running the shutdown coordination team, the man who is essentially chief engineer of the whole operation, called it plainly, a huge and complex undertaking. Over the next 4 years, his people are ripping out 1.2 kilometers of a 27-kilometer ring. They're replacing it with brand spanking new magnets. These magnets are built to run colder than the vacuum of deep space. Thousands of specialists pulled from CERN and partner institutes across the planet are all converging on Geneva for this one job. This isn't a tune-up, it's an amputation and a transplant. It's executed on the largest scale ever attempted underground, and every engineer on this crew signed a very specific, non-disclosure contract to be here. So the press release calls it an upgrade. The parts list frame it as something closer to a rebuild from the studs out. Out come the old niobium titanium magnets, and in go niobium-tin magnets. These are capable of generating a stronger field in a much smaller footprint. This kind of material science takes a national lab a decade to perfect, and a defense contractor a fraction of that to weaponize. Alongside the magnets are crab cavities, a piece of hardware whose entire job is to tilt the incoming particle bunches at just the right angle so more of them collide instead of missing each other in the dark. None of this is secret, all of it is published, and none of it is being covered anywhere outside of a physics journal, which is exactly how you'd want the biggest infrastructure story of the decade to be handled, if you didn't want anybody outside the field asking follow-up questions. The stated goal is what they call luminosity. Physics speak for cramming more collisions into every pass of the beam. When the upgrade machine restarts, it won't be smashing a handful of isolated protons together for the cameras. It will be generating somewhere between 140 and 200 collisions every single time 2 particle bunches cross paths inside that detector. That works out to be more than 5 billion interactions per second. Now, let that sit for a moment. 5 billion collisions every second. Every villain in cinema history dreamed of a machine with that kind of throughput, and none of them ever got the budget to actually build one. This upgrade is running somewhere north of 1 billion Swiss francs, funded by member state contributions, which are also topped up with direct financial injections from the United States, China, Japan. The original machine was already paid off years ago. This new money isn't retiring a debt, it's buying something else completely. You don't raise capital on that scale to tighten bolts in a tunnel. You make sure that the invoice reads scientific infrastructure. What a weapons program looks like from the outside when a military program or an intelligence agency goes quiet for restructuring is never paperwork. Every case officer who's ever run an asset knows what sudden radio silence actually means. The pieces are being repositioned before the next operation, and nobody briefs the field until the assets are already in place. They're taking the single most complex machine humanity has ever built, and they're turning it into a sledgehammer aimed squarely at the foundational code of our reality. But smashing reality opens only half the job. The real question, the one nobody on YouTube is actually asking, is what happens to the pieces once you break something that big? You don't process that much in truth. You build something whose only function is to delete it before anybody downstream even knows it existed. And you do it right out in the open, because you know nobody is coming to audit the books. Every Bond villain eventually gets a visit. Interpol, MI6, a UN inspector with a clipboard and a badge demanding to see what's behind the door marked authorized personnel only. CERN doesn't get that visit. CERN's only oversight is CERN's own council, made up of the same 24 member states writing the checks that fund it. There is no independent inspector, no outside regulator with the standing authority to walk in unannounced and ask all of the hard questions. The people approving the operation and the people paying for the operation are the very same people sitting at the same table. If the villain owns the only agency that could ever investigate the villain, the story doesn't need a cover-up, it just needs silence. And silence is cheap. 5 billion collisions a second creates a data tsunami no classical storage system on Earth can hold. So CERN doesn't try and keep it. They built a filter instead, a trigger system that makes one binary call in a fraction of a microsecond with no appeals. It's either keep it or erase it forever. The strike rate is brutal. Nearly everything the machine produces gets thrown away, and it's on purpose. When the High-Luminosity Collider finally comes online, CERN will only ever capture 1/100th of 1% of what the collider produces, and the algorithm making that call is coded entirely on what we already know. The standard model. It was never built to recognize something genuinely new. So if the exact thing this machine claims to be hunting, the anomaly, the exception, the fragment of a different timeline, ever shows up in this data, there is a 99.999% chance it gets deleted before a human ever sees it. With the new collider, classical logic circuits are going to be hitting a wall. They will not be able to make these calls fast enough anymore, not at the volumes the upgraded machine is about to produce. So CERN is recruiting a mind that doesn't exist yet. It has to be built from scratch, and it has to be built fast. They are calling it Quantum Technology Initiative, a dedicated task force betting that quantum machine learning can recognize patterns no classical computer on Earth could ever untangle. But there is a catch, and it's the same catch every ambitious program runs into. Current quantum hardware is fragile, it's noisy. It cannot sit directly in the blast radius of a live particle accelerator without falling apart. So instead of one perfect weapon, they're building a hybrid, a two-stage system. Classical hardware takes the front line. It's the brutal first filter, compressing the data and throwing out the obvious noise in real time. What survives that first cut, that tiny little fraction, makes it through, and then gets handed off to quantum algorithms for the deeper analysis. The bouncer at the door clears the room, and once safe, the specialist does the real work. Think about what that actually means, stripped of the technical language. Data generated by a quantum physical process. The violent collision of subatomic particles is being handed to AI, and it thinks in the exact same language of quantum probability. We are no longer simply smashing particles to see what falls out. We are training a synthetic mind to read the raw source code of the universe, and we are asking it on our behalf to decide what's real and what's just a glitch. If a quantum AI ever decides that a genuine anomaly belongs in the historic records and chooses on its own initiative not to delete it, who finds out? And more importantly, who doesn't? While the internet keeps arguing about the long shutdown, the people who are actually running this are already decades ahead. In the same way, a Bond villain is already 3 moves past the hero's current theory. The LHC, even fully upgraded, is the warm-up act. The real endgame already has a name. The Future Circular Collider, 91 kilometers, and it's a tunnel so large it runs beneath sovereign borders without asking permission from the people who live above it. The cost of Phase 1 is roughly $17 billion US, designed to operate well into the next century, long after everyone currently arguing about it is already gone. Every era gets the villain's lair it deserves. A hollowed-out volcano, a rocket silo, a supertanker built to swallow submarines whole. Audiences always laugh at the scale of it, because surely no one could ever get planning permission for something like that. 91 kilometers of tunnel under 3 sovereign borders proves otherwise. The only real difference between a fictional volcano base and the future circular collider is that one needed a production budget. The other one already has $17 billion committed before the first shovel even gets into the ground. This is the lair Ian Fleming would have written about in a novel, and one Albert Broccoli would have needed a soundstage at Pinewood just to fake convincingly. Except this time, there is no MI6 dossier being quietly compiled at Thames House in London. No last-minute parachute drop by Bond through a skylight. No hero on a countdown clock. So who's paying for all of this? For the first time in CERN's history, a flagship project is being financed with private money instead of taxpayer funding alone. This should concern us. In December 2025, CERN accepted pledges totaling roughly $1 billion US. This was not from any government, but from private individuals and their foundations, with names like that of former Google CEO Eric Schmidt through his own strategic innovative fund, the Breakthrough Prize Foundation backed by Sergey Brin and Mark Zuckerberg, French telecom billionaire Xavier Niel, and Ferrari chairman John Elkann. Nobody named here has said anything sinister, and this certainly isn't an accusation against a single one of them. But do look at the shape of the thing. The same people who hold the deed to our data, our attention, and our digital infrastructure are now buying a stake in the machine that will help define our understanding of physical reality itself. When private capital funds rockets, it's buying a piece of low Earth orbit. When private capital funds 91 kilometers of a quantum machine like this, it's buying a piece of something that doesn't have a name yet. There's a physicist's name worth knowing here, Igor Novikov. His theory says that the universe doesn't tolerate paradox. If you tried to go back and stop your own birth, something would always intervene. Not through force, but because the math simply won't permit an inconsistent outcome. One glitch, one correction. The grandfather paradox. That model was based on a single event, a single human seeking to rewrite a single moment of time. It never calculated a machine with the raw sustained power to act as a clamp, to act like it was holding 2 timelines pressed against each other for 18 years and counting. If CERN has been running that clamp since 2008, you don't get one clean paradox that resolves itself and then moves on. You get sustained bleed, fragments from one timeline lodged permanently inside the other, because 2 timelines were never separated long enough to snap back apart on their own. That's not the Mandela Effect as a glitch. That's a sustained cross-contamination. And will that cross-contamination undo itself if the machine goes quiet for 4 years? Here's the version that nobody prepared for. What happens if over the next 4 years the anomalies just stop? What if the Mandela Effect glitches quieten down, and the shared false memories fade and the timeline appears to knit itself back together, the way it should have been all along? If reality does in fact heal itself, who is then going to ensure the machine stays turned off forever? The soft start worked exactly as designed. The public took the bait. They argued about a logo and a hand gesture in a statue. They never once demanded for the switch to be thrown permanently off. Now the trigger systems are being rebuilt from the ground up to build the very next, far more destructive version of this machine. And the world is relying on the villain to self-govern, and ensure humanity's safety. In this story, there is no Bond, there is no MI6, no God-fearing government coming to save us. Why? Because the villain has convinced them. It's just science. And if it's just science, why is it that unidentified aerial phenomena have been so prolific since 2008 in ways that we've not seen since we discovered nuclear weapons? Mark your calendar for one more date. The CERN Council is expected to vote on final construction of the future circular collider in 2028. It's 2 years from now. While the long shutdown is still underway, while the trigger systems are still being rewritten, while the quantum recruit is still being trained. By the time that most of the world notices that there is a decision to make, the decision will already have been made. The long shutdown itself is exactly what it looks like. It's a quiet before the storm, and the countdown to the main event has begun.